It's time to talk about UCF recruiting's commitments, recruiting needs, and the official visits that are coming up. My name's Brian Smith, and this is the Daily Night. I am back off the road for a brief moment. I'll be back in another state here shortly to finish up the spring ball and all the camps, and I can finally be home for a while, which will be nice. But until then, this episode is about as close to a primer for recruiting as you're going to get because it encapsulates all three areas. First off, we'll talk a little bit about the players that are committed to the Knights. Then we'll move on to the players that, fit positions, fit needs that they need. It's very broad. It's subjective. And quite frankly, it's never ending, but I'll keep it to a minimum just to kind of give an overview. And then finally, I'll talk about some of the official visits, depending on what you believe, because it is incredibly fluid whenever you're talking about Florida prospects, which are by far the most difficult to figure out what they're going to do of any state in the country. I don't know why that is, but every year it's the same. So with that, we have 6 players to start off with to talk about, just to kind of give an overview of where the class of 2023 UCF Knights are. 6 players. These are the ones that have already openly said publicly, I'm going to be a Knight. First off, just kind of go by position, not necessarily when they committed or anything like that. I'm just going to go by position. Dylan Risk. He is the quarterback out of Cardinal Gibbons down in Fort Lauderdale. I actually went to see him play this past Saturday. He's a run-pass quarterback, but he, in his own words, I consider myself a passer first. He's listing himself at 6'2", 205. He's a kid that just kind of has moxie to him and how he plays. He finds a way to get around guys. I know that is horrific in terms of grammar if you were writing it, but it's just the unknown. He just figures it out on the fly. There is no definition of who, what, when, where, why. He just does it. And he extends plays that way, which fits any offense in today's modern era, because with the playmakers out wide, that allows you a lot of opportunities to do things down the road. Maybe you just get away and throw it out of bounds to preserve the down and not take a negative play. Or you may throw a 4-yard pass and watch somebody make 2 guys miss and then hit the Jets and score. With the type of speed that UCF has been recruiting, that's certainly plausible. Risk is a player that has the ability to throw it down the field. He can hit the out pattern. He understands the screen game. He mentioned to me the other day when I interviewed him, and you can see this on Inside the Knights on Fan Nation, powered by Sports Illustrated. I got a couple articles about him up on the site here recently. You can basically see the wheels turning when just talking about it. But he mentioned film and understanding the process of how the offense works as a priority this summer before the next season starts. And he also talked a little bit about just, being a leader. That's one of the things he's doing better, and that's important when you're a quarterback. He has a bright future, however it turns out, in terms of when he gets to play. But UCF found themselves a quarterback pretty early for the class of 23. They don't have a running back committed yet, but looking at the list, this is such a unique group of players they have committed already, because they're mostly Florida kids, but the couple that aren't necessarily where you would think they're from. So to that end, the kid that I'm really curious about, and I maybe the highest on out of everybody in the class, is actually from North Carolina by way of Alabama. He's originally from the Auburn, Alabama, and that whole area. And that's how Gus Malzahn and everybody knows about him. He actually played for one of the guys on the staff, etc. Tight ends coach who's going to play for was the head coach for him when he was a freshman in high school, Brian Blackman. So there's your connection for a kid from North Carolina. Why is he going to UCF? His name's Devonte Connor, and he plays in just a general high school in North Carolina, but the way he moves is not general. He is a very athletic young man. He could be an edge defender if he wanted. He's more or less a big receiver right now, in my opinion. He'll have to learn inline blocking in a different manner if he's going to be a major football player all the way up to the NFL level. But as a receiver, he's already there. He's dynamic. He's a lot more like Gamble, that it just transferred over from Florida for UCF. He's not going to be used just in one role. He could be an H-back. He can be used really as a split end, especially in the goal line area where you have to sell out for the run. So you got one guy on a player out wide, tight end or otherwise. And if they throw a fade, they throw a fade. You're completely at a disadvantage as a defense at that point. So UCF has a way to use guys like that. So he is freakishly athletic, and I think that he's one of the most underrated players in the country. Just want to mention him just from that perspective, because I find it comical what some of his rankings are and stuff. I got a little note by him on my page over here that I'm looking at on the other screen. But it's one of those things, man. Sometimes guys just kind of get overlooked because of where they are, not because of who they are. Another player that I find really intriguing is Jamal Merriweather. He's a kid with a lot of upside. He's from Brunswick, Georgia, which is about an hour north of Jacksonville along the coast on I-95 if you're taking the interstate headed north out of the state of Florida. And he's 260, 270, somewhere in that range, depending on the day. And he has a lot of upside. He's a lot like Connor, just at a different position. UCF is fortunate to have a really good offensive tackle like that already in the fold. I'll come back to offensive line in the third part of this podcast, but he is intriguing because I think he could play guard. I think he could play tackle. He could be a right tackle. He could be a left tackle. Much is yet to be determined. Connor doesn't have one spot that defines him yet, and it's because he's still filling out his body and he's still learning technique. Not one or the other, both. So UCF is looking at a big piece of clay and trying to figure out how to mold it into what they want. And he had several offers, and UCF was his choice. He committed during the spring game. That's a really big pickup because you can't get enough kids like that in your program. It's hard enough to project offensive linemen as it is. I hate rating offensive linemen other than just pure, already advanced offensive tackles, which is cheating basically, because most of them aren't ready to be graded, but yet that's where it is. Most guys that weigh 270 and up aren't that easy to grade because their bodies aren't done. This kid is a great example of that. He'll probably be rated a 3-star all the way through because he's not going to be finished anywhere near really being finished until he's at least 20, meaning about his junior year. That's the typical norm, and why you see so many guys in the NFL that are from like northern Iowa or whatever. It's just impossible. So the best thing to do is take measurables, and this kid's got it. He's at least 6'5", and he has the athleticism to kick step, and he has the power to dry block. With a guy like Herb Hand, who's a very good offensive line coach, that's what you're looking for. They don't really, no offense to him, but they don't care what On3 or Rivals or 24/7 or think about that. O-line in particular, it's about individual grades done by coaches. It's not a UCF thing. That's cross country. It's just really hard to project O-line. Now, what do I think is going to happen with him? I have no idea. He's just a good-looking prospect. I like his film, but it's just based on athleticism. He's got a long way to go, and we simply do not know because he hasn't gained the weight yet. But he's a kid that is, quite honestly, a kid that's going to end up in the NFL or may never even start at UCF. Talent is there. Now, does the technique follow? Does the weight follow? Does he put in the time in the weight room, etc.? Those are questions that almost every single offensive line recruit that I've ever seen in the last 25 years, I would say the same thing about, other than the few guys that are, traditionally unusual, if you will. Like there's a handful in each class. They're like a 4 or 5-star kid that's 295, 310, something like that. They can come in and play because they've already adjusted to their weight. Those guys are really rare. It's one thing to be big. It's another one to understand how to use it. This kid is still trying to get to that point, and he still has to get the technique. But I do like the upside. And to be honest, that's pretty much how about all the really good programs do it. They find athletes that kind of fit what they're doing, whether it's a man scheme, whether it's a zone scheme, whether it's a combination, and just how many they need in a class. UCF didn't sign a pure tackle in the last recruiting class, 2022. That cannot be forgotten either, because now they have one, potentially speaking, because he could probably play guard as well. And you can go and get another one. And if the right player comes along, you're not rushing because you got to get numbers. It's hard to say, but linemen commit earlier, by and large. I don't know the reason for that. It's just always been that way. Quarterback, I get it because there's only like one guy in a class, but linemen are in the same boat, and there's more of them than anybody. So I don't get it. But getting him in the fold now, Coach Hand and everybody on the staff evaluating a line. If you get one more, you're fine. But if you can get a second one and you find a third, maybe you take him, and then however it works out in terms of one player ends up playing inside, or maybe they all play tackle and one of them's a swing player, kind of like Sam Jackson is for UCF. Those guys are invaluable. That gives UCF a lot of flexibility. Moving to the defensive side of the ball, the first player that committed to the Knights is also one of the most unique young men that's probably going to sign. That's Troy Ford Jr. He's a linebacker / edge defender. He can play all over the front seven. In short, I don't really think he has a position projected at middle linebacker, but I think he could play edge in certain circumstances in a 3-3-5, a 3-4, or whatever. It's stand up position. He could do that. Troy is a very thick lower trunk player. His hips, his power. When he hits somebody, there is a collision. When I had the opportunity to see his commitment up in Savannah, Georgia, as he plays at Calvary Day School, his coach spoke, and he said, if we could get all our kids to be as physical as Troy, and I'm paraphrasing here, but we'd be in really good shape. Well, not every kid is 6'1", 230 and built like Troy. That's part of it. He knows he's going to win those collisions more often than not. So he's always stuck his nose in there, but even before he got big, though. And I think that's probably what his coach was referring to more than anything else. It's very important. Now, the biggest point about Troy moving forward, flexibility. Again, probably inside linebacker, but if he's a swing player, and I'll talk about the other two in a moment, one of the other edge defenders gets hurt, or it's just a specialty situation where a guy's been on the field a whole bunch against a team that's running tempo, and Troy was out of the lineup, things just all timing. No matter what you talk about in life, timing is just such an important part of it. He comes in, maybe he plays edge on 3rd and 6, and he goes after the quarterback and forces him to throw the ball earlier than once, and it's a pick or something. Having position flexibility is very important, but I do think with his leadership and his personality, he's a very likable young man. He has a chance to be a team captain. He has a chance to be the leader of the defense and actually call the defense. Those are attributes that most coaches don't even like guys like me even mentioning coming in general, because a lot of kids just don't deserve it. A lot of kids are just really immature, and that's part of life, but they're not ready for that transition to be in the middle, whether it's UCF, Ole Miss, USC, doesn't matter, of a program that has, a lot of responsibility. They're moving up into the Big 12, et cetera. UCF, the defense really stepped up last year. They're trying to take pride, and there's a system and everything. I'm going to guarantee you he's going to play somewhere in the front seven pretty early, because it's going to be too hard to keep him off the field. And they need size at linebacker. And they also just flat out need numbers. By far, it's the biggest concern heading into the 22 season, and it could be for 23 as well, depending on how some young guys develop and the transfer portal. So I'm going to project Troy to end up at middle backer, but he could play some will, and he could even play on the edge at some point. We will see. He's played all over for Calvary Day School up in Savannah. It just depends on what they needed. Again, guy gets hurt, a guy's struggling, whatever, they would move Troy around and he would adjust. That's a team player. Now, on the edge, this is where UCF has already hit the home run. Caven Call from Apopka, very good football player. He committed to the Knights on Christmas Day, 2021. He was the first player in the class of 2023 to pledge to UCF. With a Georgia offer, that kind of gives you an idea what kind of talent he is. He earned the offer while at camp. And this past, it was a week or so ago, in the spring game, matter of fact, it was 1 week ago, they played against Lake Gibson. Caven told me he had 3 sacks. I had a buddy of mine who was at the game, Zach Goodall, who runs the All Gators site on Fan Nation. He sent me the videos. He ate them alive. And he was pretty much in the backfield about every other play. His hand technique, his first step, his power, his pad level, all very good. He's playing at a program in Apopka that is tradition rich. There is an expectation, not just for the program, but for the defense that is different. There's only a handful of schools in the state that have that same kind of attack mode that Apopka does and backs it up yearly. There may be one of 10, I would say, Miami Central, Seminole, which is one of their rivals, and some of the other schools down south in Florida, maybe Lake City, Columbia. They've always had kids in North Florida. There's some different schools, Madison County. But for the big school division, very few are like Apopka, and he's helping keep that tradition alive, and he'll be their best defensive player. That alone, when you think about Apopka football, if you follow the state of Florida high school football in the way that I do, speaks volumes. 2, he's just a kid because I know him, is relentless. I've known him for a couple of years. Caven does not care. He is going to come downhill. He's going to be physical. He's going to use his hands, and he's going to disengage from blockers. Finally, with him, I think that while he's not necessarily the most talkative kid, Troy's, as an example, is more talkative than Caven. He's not shy either. Along the defensive line, he'll have a presence, and he'll be a guy that'll help lead in the offseason. He'll be a guy that makes himself known in the weight room, and he's going to go to class too. He's not an idiot just trying to play football. He's a good young man, and he wants to get a degree from UCF. So good for him. Finally, Isaiah Nixon, the other defensive end, another kid with a Georgia offer. He plays at Lakewood High School, which I'm very familiar with because I live in Tampa. Lakewood is over in St. Pete. It is, without question, the most tradition-rich program over on that side of the Bay. And I went and saw them play. I'm going to do another podcast about some of the spring games. He didn't participate in it. He was sitting out, but they're loaded again, and adding him is just kind of a fuel to the fire. But that program, there's a pride to it, kind of like a Popka. We're going to do things here that, the other team can't do anything about athletically, and they get after it. That's good for him because when he steps on the field in college, Isaiah's a long kid, 6'4", 220. He's not going to be overwhelmed with the circumstance. Just going to practice is probably a bigger influence on him than actually playing football games. If I remember correctly, they were 4A last year, 4 or 5A. Everybody they had that played receiver or tight end that was a senior last year went on to play at college. It was a starter. I mean, it's ridiculous. They had a kid that was playing receiver. They moved to tight end at least part of the time. They signed with Alabama because they had so many skill guys. That's what he's practicing against. It's ridiculous. So when you're playing in a school that has that expectation, you're going to be ramped up. Seeing Isaiah up front, nice kid, has a lot of athleticism. He's all the things you're looking for. You can put him in front of the camera or you can put him on the edge. Whatever you're doing, it's good for UCF. Those are the players that everybody needs in college football, not just UCF. You need well-rounded players on and off the gridiron. Really well-spoken young man, and I think that he has a chance to play early, much like Caven does, because he's just going to get after it. UCF is one of the very few schools that has not one but two edge defenders that have a really good future in the country, not just like in the American Athletic Conference or the Big 12, any conference, SEC, etc. They're really doing well there. And again, Troy can play that edge position too if need be. So they're in pretty good shape. Moving on to the second category, but before I do, just note that they're not necessarily going to sign 20 high school players. Remember, with the transfer portal, all the things I'm saying here can change in a moment's notice because of the portal, good or bad. You may ramp up numbers or you may go down. They're at 6 right now, which is fine for the class of 23, but they only, really need to sign about 15 with the way they're going after the kids in the portal. So here's the question. At what rate do they really take kids, or do they really just focus on certain players? So this next segment is really interesting. Recruiting needs. I could make it a 5-hour episode on by itself. Like, it's just ridiculous because football is that complex. But with UCF, I know it well enough, and I'm not trying to take a 5-hour podcast for anybody, especially my voice. But the following is all I'm really going to say. You're done at quarterback. Running back is a very deep group. If they get somebody, to me, they have to be very picky. It's got to be a specific guy, meaning really good out of the backfield. And I mean freaking really good. Like, he can play receiver if running back doesn't work out, or it's just a flat-out dude. To my knowledge, they have zero shot at Richard Young or Cedric Baxter Jr., the two best running backs in the state of Florida. So they may not even sign a kid, but they have enough depth because of the kids they have on the roster. It's not a huge need. Kids come and go with the transfer portal. That'll take care of itself. Not really worried about it. Receiver is the intriguing part. They don't have a kid committed, at least publicly. You know how that goes with recruiting nowadays in Florida kids. But they could take 2 and be okay, but I would prefer it was 3. I just have a feeling like they got Kobe Hudson this year. Do they go ahead and go that route again? Do you take a couple of kids? I mean, the 2 they got this year are great. And do you go ahead and throw the football around a little bit with some young receivers this year? Maybe it does well and you get a third one late. I think that Xavier and Quan coming in, I think both of them can play early. And a certain young man they got from Georgia, I've said this a half dozen times on different podcasts and in different articles, is a really good football player. They should have the opportunity to knock it out of the box with him as well. I just don't know if it'll be quite as quick. I don't know him like I do the other two. And it could attract more receiving opportunities in the class of 23. This is a phenomenal year in the state of Florida for high school receivers, and it's really good nationally in general. So I just don't know which kids are going to visit. It's hard to say, but the offense is going to take off a little bit more than people know, in my opinion, based on what I heard and based on just the eyeballs, what I saw in spring game. I'm firmly in the camp that a certain young man that just transferred over from Ole Miss will be the starting quarterback. But even if he's not, the other guy is no slouch either. Keen can throw it. Now the final step is how well do they all bond together? Receiver and quarterback. There's no two positions that are connected quite like them. So I'm going to project 2 receivers, possibly 3 if they can get the right guy, and we'll see. Tight end Connor, I already mentioned him. They would like a second guy, especially, and this is just the term in football, if he can play in the hip. If you hear anybody ever say that, that means H-back or kind of like on the back pocket of the offensive tackle or the tight end, or maybe between them kind of off the line. It's the H-back position. It is just flat out a flexible position. Motion man, fullback, catch passes in the flat, be a blocker. It's all the above. And a lot of times there's shorter guys that are really compact and powerful, 6'2", 240, something like that. But we'll see. There's some other tight ends that they could possibly grab. We'll see how it works out. Maybe a portal guy. Maybe they move a linebacker from there. I have no idea. But if they don't get exactly what they want, they'll probably just go portal. Offensive line, they've got Merriweather. We talked about that a little bit. They were light on numbers last year. They need to get 4 or 5. They have 1. They need at least, keyword, at least 1 more offensive tackle, preferably 2, with one of them having the ability to jump to the interior whenever needed. The Sam Jackson mold, may it live forever. You need guys that are not only physically capable of doing it, but mentally not bitching and complaining, because a lot of guys say, I'm only a tackle. And those are the guys that don't ever go to the NFL, by the way. And I'm only going to do this. Yeah, goodbye. You need team first guys up front. Period. It is non-negotiable. Find, there's the portal. If UCF can find 2 tackles, at least one of the 2 that can physically do it and play guard as well, they would be in good shape. And then you take 1 pure interior guy, possibly 2, depending on what you think of some guys that are in fall camp, what you think of their off season, or just getting started, summer semester is getting ready to start at UCF. If you can do that, then you're in pretty good shape. The minimum number to me for high school, let me be specific about that, is 4. Got to get 4. And if you do that, UCF should be in pretty good shape. Again, because of the portal, you can be flexible. If they were in this spot and the portal was not in a situation, I would not kid you. I would say 5 is minimum. 6 is probably what you need. And that's never good because somebody's going to transfer. But they just didn't have a good year offensive line recruiting last year. Things fell through. They got 1 really good player, and that was it. You need to figure that out now, and you got to make up for numbers. It's O-line. You want at least 13, 14 guys on your roster, because it takes so long to develop, and the hit rate is not high with O-line. It's very difficult to project. Moving to defense, I was very concerned about defensive tackle recruiting for a while, but then right after I said that, they had got, Terry Simmons and some other guys I'll talk about in a second, lined up visits. They don't have anybody committed at D tackle, but I'm coming back to that for anybody that wants to ask me, send me a message or whatever. D-end should be good to go. They got Nixon and they've got Call. You just keep recruiting them to make sure they stick with you. If you get 2 guys like that every year, you're good to go. You can play in any league, SEC, otherwise, it doesn't matter. You can play at a high level. Just got to keep recruiting like that every year. I know that's a boring report, but the boring report means you're going to win more. So be happy with it. Get those 2 guys every year, we're good. Linebacker, 3 at least. I'm counting Troy as 1. He's, again, as I noted in segment 1, a very flexible player. That's good. They also need a guy that can just fly, that's a little undersized, a 200-pound kid, preferably tall. I know that's hard to get. 6'3", 200-pound kid that doesn't mind gaining weight and playing in the slot. I mean, there's about 2 of those in the country, but everybody needs one, and there's 130 teams. So it's just really hard to project. But that hybrid linebacker spot, as much speed and length as possible that you can get. And there's very few guys that want to play that spot because it's unbelievably difficult and you get no glory, but that's why everybody wants one. They need one of those guys, and they also need a weak side linebacker called Will. They need a guy that can blitz some, hit a gap, create a negative play in space, cover what they call the curl flat, just directly, horizontally from the player at the line of scrimmage out towards the receiver, and be able to make open field tackles. There are a billion of those guys in the South. I have no idea who it's going to be, but they have an opportunity to be in a position to get that guy from Alabama, Georgia, or Florida. Lord only knows how many times. If they don't get one this summer, if they don't even get one to visit this summer, I am not worried. Speed at linebacker, either one of those spots is not a problem. It's just getting the guy that doesn't mind playing in space with it. That's why the hybrid spot's a little harder. Not worried. Will take care of itself. The other one, every year it's going to be difficult. It doesn't matter if you're Alabama, UCF, or anybody else. That's a tough spot to recruit. Corner and safety are in a really unique spot. UCF killed it at DB last year. Martinez and the Henderson twins are good to go. Now you just need numbers and similar talent, which is a high barometer. Can they get that locally? Sure. Braden Marshall and different guys that they're recruiting. I'll get into that in a second. Who is it? When is it? There's a bunch of cat and mouse game going on. So I'm just going to talk strictly numbers here. 2 and 2. 2 corners, 2 safeties. Thank you and goodbye. Final point on this situation. There's always a quote unquote wild card player. You see it listed on 24/7 or Rivals, etc. Athlete. If there's a guy that's just a really good football player, Georgia and Florida are famous for these kids that play several spots. You don't know where he's going to be. That's okay. Good football coaches help good football players find the spot. There's no reason to think UCF is any different. Every recruiting class that I've ever spoken to, recruiting coordinator, head coach, whatever at the college ranks, that comes up in some capacity, and usually 2 or 3 times in a conversation, just not always directly. The phrase, he's a really good football player. If I had a nickel for every time I heard a college coach tell me that in confidence about player X, and we're talking about a recruit, I'd be freaking rich. They just say football player. When they say that over and over, that's a compliment that they're not saying he's a receiver or offensive tackle or whatever. That means they think they can do different things. UCF could find one of those guys. And just to give you an example, Quan Lee, who's going to play slot more than likely at UCF, he could play outside or whatever. He could also play corner because he's an athlete. He could also play running back because he's an athlete, just from a physical standpoint. If you can get one of those, that always helps because you only get 85 scholarships. So that's very important. Final piece, the official visits. And Lord have mercy, is this a mess. With all the things that go on in the state of Florida with recruiting, meaning there's nothing settled until they've signed, this is horrific. Just in the last few days of checking it, talking to people, talking to recruits, sometimes recruits stop, they change their mind. Nothing I report is going to be accurate in 10 minutes anyway, so take everything that I'm about to say with a grain of salt, especially for the following point, and I don't in any way, shape, or form not mean it literally because they drive me nuts. High school football players in Florida are the most difficult by a landslide to follow because they are the most difficult when it comes to making a decision and sticking with it. And that's even with an official visit date. Why? I have no idea. Y'all drive me nuts. Just as an example, there are a couple of kids that I know that were going to visit UCF that either it's not happening now or they haven't given a date, like they've just stopped communicating and stuff. Yeah, it's bizarre. And it's working in the other direction too. I know of a player that's going to visit UCF from what I'm told, but it's not announced on his Twitter or anything, so I'm not going to announce it. Welcome to Florida. Welcome to UCF and everybody else that recruits this state. So with that being stated, a couple of quick notes. No matter what I report, even 5 minutes before the visits begin, it's next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend, June 3rd, when everything really kind of gets going, UCF is almost assuredly going to have a couple of kids either A, back out, or B, be added that were completely locked in otherwise. That's going to happen. So just a couple of key notes about players. I'm hoping that just in general, any county that's connected around Orlando, UCF gets kids on campus. Just see what happens. I don't care if they think they've got 0.1% chance. You have to keep the pipeline going in terms of communication, high school coaches, everything. It is a big picture deal and not just recruiting player. The schools that recruit a player from a program and don't worry about the program itself are the coaches that get fired, UCF or otherwise. And the guys that are now on this journey with UCF under Malzahn have figured that out. They've done a tremendous job with the high school camps and stuff they do in June. A lot of that will be in conjunction. I'll probably go to one of them coming up in a week or two, but they've done a good job with that. And we'll see, because again, these are high school kids in Florida. We don't know. But like John Walker is supposed to come up. He's from Osceola High School in Kissimmee. They've recruited John very hard. He was at camps and stuff last year. Great kid. National recruit at D-tackle. His other visits that he's got lined up, I think, haven't looked in a while. I want to say Ohio State, Michigan, and USC and UCF. I mean, he's all over the map with out of state and then the local school. I know Miami would take him, Florida State would take him, Florida would take him. They may not claim that right now because he's not listing them with a visit. Everybody wants the kid, okay? It doesn't matter what school it is. They would take him. Now, can UCF get him? He's been on campus. Lord only knows how many times. I bet he's been on campus 5 times or more for unofficial visits. The only question with him is this. When does he decide? Because you can only take so many players at a position. Is he a guy you take no matter what? Probably. But again, they've got Terry Simmons is coming in for a visit. He's one of Troy Ford's teammates. And you have a situation where Joshua Horton's coming in. He's a kid I saw about a week or so ago. He plays at Langston Hughes on the south edge of Atlanta. And he's a horse too. He's almost same size as John. They're almost identical. He's like 6'3", 6'4", 295. If you have guys like that are athletic that want to come to your program, how many do you take with John still being on that cusp? Because I don't expect John to commit on the visit. I would be floored. And of course, as soon as I say that, that's what he'll do. But in all seriousness, you have to start playing games with that, with your numbers. That is the complexity of recruiting. That is the complexity of UCF to Washington to Boston College. It does not matter where you're at. It's not who you want. It's who you want in conjunction with when are they going to decide and make a quote unquote final decision, meaning they're not taking visits. Florida kids take visits to the last second. You're always playing Russian roulette. So UCF is going to have a lot of difficult decisions to make, whether it's with John or other guys. So I just wanted to use him as an example. I know him pretty well. He's a great kid, but he's got an opportunity to be recruited by every school in the country. I get it. UCF, how patient will they be? I think they've got a great shot at Simmons. Horton, I think, is pretty open. We don't know. He's going to visit, I believe it's the 10th of June off the top of my head. Really like him. I've seen his film. I've seen him play live. He is a big physical interior player. You can never have enough of those guys. So, as you probably know, because I talk about a certain defensive tackle that just transferred to UCF via Auburn, I'm the guy that's all in on. If you're going to over-recruit a position, D-line is a great place to start. So Lee Hunter is, of course, the guy I'm talking about. But you can just never have enough of them, especially playing in the Orlando Heat in August. You know, just going through fall camp beats them up enough, and then the games start in September, and it's still smoking hot, even into October, etc. So got to have depth there. Linebacker, the visit situation, this is where it's intriguing to me. I would like more definitive knowledge, and I don't have it. I traveled all over the place. I've got a list. I want to see on this piece of paper. There's another list that I have. I'm going to say it's about, I hit about 30 high school / jamborees in 2 weeks for practices, jamborees, games, different things. And the one thing I can tell you is this. There are still a lot of linebackers, but the vast majority of them in Florida this year, as I mentioned in an earlier segment of this show, are the speedier type and all that, but they're maybe not quite where you want them to be fundamental. In a lot of schools, whether it's Miami, Florida State, etc., they're not sure. It's that proverbial 3-star kid in Florida that has a few offers we're not sure about. I expect a few guys to kind of step forward in the senior year. Maybe UCF jumps in on that, and they've offered plenty too, but I don't know who they're going to get. Out of all the positions, and that's the one I want to know about the most because they have the most depth concerns, I really don't know who they're going to get. Looking at the visits, and I got my list, but I consider it to be tenuous at best. I really don't know. They need 2 more, though. And because of that, I'm kind of curious what's going to happen. Are they going to add anybody that's going to change the realm immediately? Possibly. The Harris twins from Lake Brantley would be my best guess, but I haven't talked to them lately. They're a package deal flat out, and they're right down the road. They're about 30, 40 minutes away from the UCF campus. That'd be, UCF's hit that school before. They've got a running back or 2 on campus from there. Maybe that's a possibility. And then there's also the circumstance where maybe they get a kid from out of state. They've done well in Georgia. Why not? Anything's possible. Gerlins Milford, the defensive tackle out of Lakeland. He's one of those kind of late developers. He's another kid that's visiting, coming up pretty soon. Kids kind of develop later. UCF really likes him. He was in the state finals for like the shot put this year. Those kind of athletes, they develop at linebacker too. Maybe there's a kid like that they come after. So linebacker is the most hazy for me. As far as visits in the secondary, I don't know diddly. And I'm surprised because with the amount of DBs in this state and how good the UCF secondary was at the end of this last year, just say the last back half. Devonte Brown, etc. Like his brother, somebody they're recruiting. I don't think they have much of a shot. And Damari, he plays in American Heritage. I went and saw him practice about a week or 2 ago. I don't know what the deal is, but there just isn't any movement there yet. And I'm seeing the same thing with Miami and Florida and Florida State. A lot of the kids in state are just, for whatever reason, really slow in elongating their recruitment. Cormani McLean, I talked to, he has no idea where he's going to school. He's arguably the best player in the country. He plays at Lake Gibson, not that far from Orlando. I don't know what it is, but it makes it very difficult to project anything. So I'm struggling with it, and I'm sure the coaching staffs in the state of Florida are too, because they want things that are, ducks in a row, for lack of a better phrase. Safety recruiting, I'm not worried about as much. It's easier to move somebody to safety than it is a corner. Corner is always a priority. I don't care if you signed 5 corners a year before. Corner. But the way college football works, very few corners work out because it's not natural to run backwards while somebody runs at you running forward. So very few guys can actually stick with it, especially if they have any kind of injury to their lower extremities. So UCF needs at least 2. I don't know if they're going to get Braden Marshall. It's possible. He's definitely on the board. Jakeem Jackson's a kid that at one point, he hasn't answered me here recently with it, but I don't know if UCF's going to get one of his visits. It looked like he was going to at one point. I don't know if that's accurate at this point. I haven't heard. Maybe he is, but he is a dude. He ironically plays with John Walker at Osceola. They're loaded this year. They need at least one guy at minimum in every single freaking class that is extremely highly rated at corner. And so does every other school. Again, you're not going to stop these spread offenses the way they are, but you need a play somewhere in a game where you can make a momentum changing difference with just physical skill. It has zero to do with coaching. My guy's longer, my guy's faster, whatever. He's just a ball player. That's defense in today's world. You're not going to out scheme with all the advantages offenses have. It's about length and speed measurables. And a few of the kids here in Florida that are living within, just say 100-mile radius, they can all run. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. But one other thing before I go, Inside the Knights, that's the website I run on Fan Nation, powered by Sports Illustrated. Check it out. Going to be a lot of recruiting stuff. It's going to be pretty random. I'm just waiting like everybody else, which kids commit, which kids announce visits, which kids come to camp. There's going to be photo reels, video reels. Like I'll go to camp and see who they have there. I'll talk to prospects from all over the frickin' place that come into UCF. I'm still going to go to Louisiana again for a camp. There's going to be a lot of different recruiting stuff. It's an interesting time because not only what happens directly with UCF is important to the Knights, who the other schools in the state get. I'll report on that some, because if their needs, like they pick up, like Miami picks up a linebacker from, I don't know, South Carolina or something, that helps UCF in a way because then they're not competing as much because that's one less guy Miami has. All of it is math. Who's going where and when. So the date, the talent, the specific position, all of that for Florida State, Miami, that also impacts the Knights. So talk a little bit about that moving forward as well. So everybody out there, thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed. UCF recruiting, shall we say, is going to be very interesting over the next couple of months. Commitments will start with all the visits in June. That'll get going again, especially the back half of June. And then there'll probably be a lot of kids that make announcements during the month of July, around 4th of July to the 15th, when not as much is going on. So everybody be safe. Have a great day.